Hey, all you Geek 101sters, Andy here. This is an exclusive preview of the first two episodes of my new podcast, Monkey Off My Backlog. You will notice that this is only one episode. Well, I spliced episode 0, the primer, and episode 1 together for you to experience and decide, hey, maybe I want more Andy in my life, and I will subscribe to Monkey Off My Backlog. Thank you. Welcome to the Monkey Off My Backlog podcast, the podcast where we exercise our pop culture demons by tackling our media to-do lists 1 week at a time. I'm your host, Andy Bowman, and with me are my co-hosts, Dr. Sam Morris.
Hello.
And Tessa Suela.
Hello.
This week, Sam dives into a British miniseries, Tessa lives it up with the Greek pantheon, and I investigate Kurosawa's procedural crime drama. Let's get it on. So this is our first episode. I hope you listening would know that because this is episode number 1. And we're just going to talk a little bit about the ideas of this podcast, what we're doing, why I feel the need to start a second podcast, and who we are. So first, let's just cover who we are. I'm Andy Bowman. I am a grad student and co-host of the Geek 101 podcast. Go ahead, Dr. Sam.
I'm Sam Morris. I am a assistant professor of English education. I do a lot with young adult literature, and lately been writing some about music.
And I'm Tessa Suela. I am also a grad student along with Andy. One of us has moved beyond the grad student realm at this point. And I am currently writing about speculative fiction.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea. Pretty much, I think this idea comes from like chasing that dragon of wanting to experience something new and good, and I personally am always on the lookout for something that I haven't experienced before, particularly content, because I'm actually kind of a fraidy cat. Like, you know, when people say I want to experience something new, I always seem to think like, oh, you want to go skydiving or something, and I never want to skydive. So one of these things is, though, I've got lists. I mean, I've got lists of video games that I've never heard of, movies that random people on Reddit recommend with, you know, budgets in the double digits, and all these kinds of pieces of media to consume. I mean, my Netflix queue is so long. Because as soon as something interests me, I just add it to the list and then never touch it again. And I don't think I've removed anything from my Netflix queue list in like 2 years. I have a problem. And all of this collectively, the TV shows that I watched a season of and then didn't keep up with when the second season aired, the many books I have on my bookshelf because I go to a used bookstore and just buy tons of books, the many movies that I've added to lists, I want to start getting into that. I want to start actually forcing myself to say, hey, go ahead and watch this movie instead of watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer for the 13th time. Like, you need to do something new. I have this same obsession that every human has with novelty, but I also love to go through the same things because I know I liked it and it's comforting. And I was just narcissistic enough to come up with a podcast about it. And once I came up with the name, I just had to create it.
And we're very glad that you did.
It's a great name.
It's a great idea for a podcast, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I was so relieved when I looked it up and nobody had taken this name.
Well, here we are. We have taken it.
Yes. All right, guys. Let's just talk a little bit about, you know, the idea of what a backlog is. What is your guys' relationship with backlogs? Sam, why don't you go first?
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Ha.
Well, starting the first episode out with misogyny is a great idea.
Oh yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
all right, all right. Tessa, you want to go ahead?
Just dance around. This whole podcast is just going to be us going, no, you go first.
We're going to be the politest podcast south of the Canadian border.
What? So I think that people have backlogs for a lot of different reasons. I honestly kind of, when you told me about this podcast, Andy, I had this very visceral reaction of, yeah, there's so much stuff on my list. And then I realized that for me anyway, my list is a lie because I keep telling people that I have like, oh, I'll put it on my list, but there's no actual list. Or there didn't used to be. I actually did create a list for this podcast. But it's one of those things where I think that for me, a lot of it's because there are so many options now. I mean, media has really just exploded over the last 10 years with streaming and with sort of this golden age of television. Are we still in the golden age of television? I don't know. This new resurgence of really great television, especially, has made it very, very hard to keep up with everything. Music has exploded. And so it's just, there's a lot of media out there, and a lot of people are very invested in certain media. And so I just feel like it adds up. Like, you just eventually sort of get to the point where you're like you said, Andy, there's just so much out there. I'd rather just watch Grey's Anatomy again. I know what's going to happen. It doesn't scare me. And so you just sort of end up stuck in sort of a circle, and then every once in a while you add something new to the list. So I think part of the reason why there are backlogs is just the sheer number of things that exist now.
Now, Tessa, did you know we are now in uncertain times?
And just now.
Yes.
We have entered the uncertain times.
For people tuning in the year 2030, this is in the middle of the great COVID pandemic that ravaged our economy and did so much more damage. But this is also before the aliens landed and took over.
Yeah, it was before the enslavement.
And I, for one, would like to welcome our ant leaders and happily volunteer to work in their underground salt mines.
All right, Sam, what about you? What is your relationship with your own personal backlog?
I am a compulsive list maker. I before Letterboxd, I what year is it now? So about 18 years ago, I created an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of the movies I watched. It doesn't exist anymore. No, it probably still exists somewhere. I have a Goodreads account that is out of control.
He has playlists on Spotify that are itemized by year.
Yeah. So my relationships to lists is strong. If you were alive and on the internet in around 2008, I guess, one of the peak think pieces out there was about Netflix and Hotel Rwanda, and it was all about, because this was back when Netflix was by mail only. People would order Hotel Rwanda because, you know, it's the right thing to watch. Right? It's a good movie. It's got Don Cheadle. Who doesn't like Don Cheadle? It's about something very serious, very real, and very important. And then it would sit on top of the TV or the DVD player or the coffee table for months and months and months, and Netflix would just take your money. I would also add City of God to that list, neither of which I have seen. Probably will happen during the course of this podcast. But ever since then, it's just been a matter of, you know, watching things, watching shows, reading books out of obligation or not, thinking that you're obligated and not doing it. And that's where I come at this podcast. Like, I get to do all the things now, and it's fun, and it's for a good reason. You know, so I'm looking forward to it for that reason.
Well, Sam, I'm glad that you're a man after my own heart with your compulsive list making. It was... So my letterbox right now, I'm looking at it, and there are 1,051 films that I want to see. These range from movies that I don't remember adding. Like, there's something called the Niall Hilton incident. I'm sure I had a reason to add it at some point, but it's added. And yeah, the Netflix things hits home because I have a DVD copy of Black Dynamite because I kept it for so long that Netflix just charged me for the DVD.
Wow, that's next level.
I love that you guys are like compulsive list makers. My Letterboxd is literally half a week old. Like I just made it for this podcast.
And it took months to convince her to make one.
So we'll definitely talk more about our Letterboxd accounts because that's going to be a great way to keep up with us and our opinions on things beyond, Twitter. But let's kind of continue the discussion. Let's do you guys have like any tips or ideas about how to even start clearing this insurmountable amount of content that's going to take us the rest of our lives feasibly to get in? And that's not even counting the idea that there are still an inflow of new content that you're going to be adding to your list too.
Well, I think it's really important to remember that you'll just never watch, play, listen to it all. It's just not possible. Two things that I have done historically. When I first joined Goodreads, I found a community that was doing a seasonal reading challenge. In fact, it's called Seasonal Reading Challenge. And it was basically where you would score points for reading certain kinds of books that meet certain kinds of challenges. I found that group rather rigid in its rules, so I created my own spin-off called Reading with Style. Also still exists on Goodreads. I am technically a moderator of it, but I have had nothing to do with it for years. But it's just a way of gaming working through your list, and that worked for a while. Another approach that I have come to is kind of the more goal-oriented thing. I just remember I really enjoy watching the Academy Awards. I have done for years, and I eventually got to the point where I said, I'm going to watch every Best Picture nominee. This was before they expanded to 10, which made it slightly more difficult. But I've done it every year, and it's a good feeling of satisfaction. So I think different approaches to goal making definitely help make a dent.
Well, step one, make a list. If you are not a rigid list maker, it actually does help. Like I definitely have a problem where out of sight, out of mind, and so I forget about certain media for years and years and years until I'm like, oh yeah, that was something you've always planned on watching, or consuming. I guess consuming is such a strange word to use on this podcast. So I would definitely say make a list. If you're not a list maker, if you don't already have one. The other thing too is what Sam said, give yourself manageable goals. Like don't start with infinite jest if that is on your list. Start with something that's a little easier to consume, like a shorter book, or just if you're sitting there going, I can't watch this television show, there's 10 seasons of it, and where would I even start? Just watch a season of it, right? Like there's no rules saying that you have to binge the whole thing all at once. You can just say, I'm going to watch a season of this, and then I'm going to take a break and watch Grey's Anatomy or How I Met Your Mother or whatever it is that your show is that is your comfort show. You can also break it up in terms of weekly watching. You can do a weekly movie night where you take something off of the list, or you can do a weekly night where you watch. Right now, we're actually watching through the X-Files that way. We're watching 2 X-Files every Thursday night generally. So these are ways that you can sort of manage these goals and sort of break them down into manageable sizes. So you're not, doing the thing where you read the first chapter of a very difficult book and then go, oh, well, I tried. I think that's part of the problem is sort of starting too big and then not wanting to do it.
One of my personal productivity, this is a pop culture productivity podcast, which it's a great alliterative subtitle. One of my personal things that I do, and this annoys the heck out of my wife, when we're trying to watch a movie, we're trying to figure out what to watch, we're going down the list, I will now, if we can't decide within a certain amount of time, I will just play the first thing alphabetically on the list. Which is great when you are able to have everything sorted out by your list, and I'm glad to report that after like 2 years, I have finally made it through 5 centimeters at a time, the Japanese animated film.
Nice. We actually started 5 or 6 weeks ago. We took 5 slips of paper apiece and wrote down 5 movies that have come out in the last 5 years and put them in a beer stein. And that is what we do every Monday.
We draw a movie.
Yep.
And we watch that movie.
And we like it.
That's a great idea. Maybe we can make like a randomizer, right? And have randomizer episodes where we
I think it'd be cool.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just where we have a randomizer, we click it, and it's just like Andy does this, Tessa does this, Sam does this.
Okay. So we're obviously also going to do the Infinite Jest theme week, correct?
Infinite Jest theme.
I will listen to a podcast about Infinite Jest called Just Friends.
I also think that it would be cool maybe in a future episode to have like a fan letterbox request. Like fans could come on and our audience could look at our letterboxes and say, Tessa should watch this movie. Sam should watch this movie.
Okay.
Like a theme.
Well, now I think we should call our fans monkeys, our listeners. I think we should call them monkeys, right?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Monkeys.
That's the kind of genius that you're listening to this for. I will go ahead and let people know who have somehow suffered through the first however long we've been recording. I don't think that these episodes will be this long normally. And we are all about positivity and actually getting through your backlog. So we do want to hear from you guys. Like, if we can convince you to finally watch Akira Kurosawa's High and Low, which is my pick for this, or whatever's been that monkey on your backlog, whatever's been your Infinite Jest, because I'm guessing Tessa hasn't read Infinite Jest since she's bringing it up so much.
Infinite Jest and I have a relationship. It's not a healthy or functional one, but it's a relationship.
Right. So we listeners, like this is the first episode, but letting you know right now, keep us updated on what you're doing. Give us things to add to our lists, because or at least I am a massive masochist, and I want that. I want to know more things, and here's the best part. I don't know if you guys have ever had something hyped up to you, and then you realize after experiencing it, it wasn't worth experiencing.
Never. That has never happened to me. Everything has always met expectation.
Right. Hopefully this show can actually help some people out with that. When, I watch a movie and I'm like, oh, well, it was fine. Green Book hasn't stood the test of time in these past few years.
I feel like Green Book was already outdated when it came out, but that's a different podcast.
Yeah. So, and beyond that, I do want to go ahead and just verify that this is a judgment-free zone from me, probably from Tessa and Dr. Sam.
Yes.
I have some big gaps in my repertoire of things I should watch, right? There's going to be moments where something will pop up on the podcast feed in the title, and a fan somewhere out there, we're going to call you Peter, will scream, "What? How have you not seen Terminator?" I'm sorry, I haven't, okay? Don't judge me. I won't judge you. This is all about positivity and finally tackling those things up. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't make you a bad person if you haven't seen Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Which listeners of the Geek 101 podcast will know that for the longest time, the only Indiana Jones movie I had seen was Crystal Skull.
But why?
Ew.
Hey, and you know what? Crystal Skull was not bad.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, a little judgment.
Judgment free.
Okay.
Yeah.
Judgment free.
Just about his opinion, not that he hadn't seen the other
Right.
ones.
So you see, because I hadn't seen the other ones, I actually didn't have any expectations about Crystal Skull, and it was fine.
Okay, that makes
sure.
sense.
Yeah,
I could
sure.
see how that would work, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you'll hear the deets at, short for details, at the end of the podcast on how to get in contact with us and let us know. But please, we want this to be a beacon of hope in these dark, uncertain times. All right, guys. We have come up with 2 rules, maybe, for this podcast that I can think of. One being that the content we are covering, we will try our hardest to be spoiler-free. We're only going to be discussing the first third of whatever we listen to, unless there's something that absolutely has to be talked about, and that will clearly be telegraphed much earlier. We don't want to spoil anyone. We don't want to take away anyone's fun of finding out that Darth Vader is Lord Voldemort, right?
Right. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
that's a really important twist. We would not want anyone to know that.
And my personal thing, and you will realize that I am already thinking of ways to undermine this, but this piece of media should have been on your list for at least a year.
Yes, I think, I want to be as flexible about it as possible because we've talked a lot about how we want to tackle different kinds of media. So, some weeks, we're going to be looking at movies, and some weeks, some of us will be looking at books or music or video games or, different things, different types of media. And so we want to make sure that it is actually a monkey off the backlog, not, just, oh, I've been wanting to watch this for 3 weeks. But I think at the same time, there's going to be some flexibility in these rules because, for an example, if one of us does a piece of music, I hate to tell you guys, music's really hard to spoil. I can't talk about the first third of a song. But I think, just sort of abiding by the spirit of the rules and saying, yeah, this is something that's been out for over a year, at least a year. It's not been on my list that long. It's not something I just heard about. I think...
Tessa, you've got to, when you're doing a song, you'll say something like, okay, so the song is all about how this person will do anything for love. Anything at all. And you can't spoil the rest of that line.
No.
Right?
No.
And you can't tell somebody when the beat drops.
Yeah, I can't tell them.
If it doesn't happen in the first minute, I'm not going to tell you.
It.
I can't even tell you if the beat drops.
Oh, guys. Yeah, but I think generally those are 2 good guiding principles. So spoiler free, unless otherwise indicated, and has been on the list for at least a year.
Right. And within a few weeks, there will be such a sneaky monkey-like way that I'm going to undermine that second one.
I'm looking forward to it.
Right.
I look forward to the challenge.
Okay. All right. Well, we are totally back on what is the exact same day that we were recording earlier, and totally not a different day. We are going to be talking about what we've been catching up on this week. So, Tessa, what did you catch up on? What did you cover?
Well, Andy, in honor of the recently announced series on Disney Plus, I chose The Lightning Thief, which is the first book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series.
What is The Lightning Thief about? Assume that I am somebody who did not read books for 5th graders in college like I actually did.
Well, it is a middle grade book. It is, well, I'll give you the premise first, and then I'll give you some of the details about it. So the book is basically about Percy Jackson, who is a troubled 6th grader who discovers early in the novel that the Greek gods are real and have been living in America for quite some time. He learns that his father is Poseidon. This is very early on. None of this is major spoilers. And that he is a demigod, and that there's this whole supernatural world that he did not know existed. But there's trouble amongst the gods, which threatens to destroy the human world, so Percy and his new friends must go on a quest to save everybody. This book was originally published in 2005. Like I said, it's the first book in five. There's five of them, in the series. There's also a couple of spin-off series. It's by Rick Riordan. Have we agreed?
Decided Riordan. I
yeah,
think we
have
landed
we
on
agreed that that's how? I know that there was a debate for a while.
I always say Riordan.
All right.
I like it. It gives it a little flair. Yeah.
That is the first time I've been able to roll my R's, so
there you go.
We're proud of you.
Yeah, congratulations. The other, I know that he has also written other spin-off series in the same universe that are about other pantheons, as well. And it's sort of a middle grade cross between American Gods and Harry Potter. That's probably the best description I could give you of what it is if you're looking to anchor it within sort of middle grade young adult traditions.
Now, is Rick Riordan, is he as horribly transphobic as J.K. Rowling?
No, I don't think so. I haven't really followed Rick Riordan.
I
don't want to say anything because I feel like somebody's going to write in and say, but he said one time.
I mean, I don't know. Did I present a paper at a conference about homophobia in one of the later books?
Did you?
I did.
Oh yeah, you did.
I did.
I had totally I actually did not remember that.
But is
until
that
just
the
now.
author being homophobic or creating characters who are homophobic, or is it both the same thing? But anyway, that's several books in the future. Don't worry about it.
It is always a question. No homophobia in The Lightning Thief.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so this book, clearly not a difficult read. Is there a reason why you have not gotten around to reading it yet?
Like I said, it came out in 2005. So I was 15, so I was a little bit older than the target audience. I also, as will come up many times in this podcast, came from a family that was semi-suspicious of books about magic or magical elements. This is when I was 15. They totally relaxed their rules later. And so, like, it just wasn't a book that was really on my radar at the time. But I wanted to read it. I mean, I have wanted to read it for a while. It's been on my list for a while because it has such a massive fan base. People love these books. There's a lot of, especially female fans, that really love these books and read them even when they're not in the target age group. I know a lot of people who were reading them in their early 20s, and we have a lot of mutual friends that also are huge fans of this series as well. I think there were also 2 movie adaptations of them several years ago. I don't think that they were super well received.
They're not good.
but yeah, so it's been on my radar for a while. I'm a big fan of reimaginings of mythology in novels and fantasy. I'm been a student of mythology, both Greek, Norse, what have you, for a while. And so I've always just been kind of interested in this genre.
Okay. Now, are there... I mean, how did you feel after reading it? Was it good? Was it bad? Go ahead and give me what you thought about this book. Because, I don't do much reading nowadays, but I remember thinking back on certain elements of children's books as being a little problematic sometimes.
Yeah, so I recently recently watched an interview that Neil Gaiman did with N.K. Jemisin for the Fisher Center. And they were talking about rereading childhood books, things that you read as a child that you then read as an adult. And he pointed out that the book that you read as an adult is different than the book you read as a child. I did not read The Lightning Thief as a child, but I definitely had a different reading experience of The Lightning Thief than I think your average middle grader would have. There are some very good elements to it. I did very much enjoy reading it. Rick Riordan is a very good writer. It's a really great first-person point of view. I had that very rare experience of actually hearing Percy Jackson's voice while I was reading it. He creates this character that's so well-rounded, and you can hear him, basically, as he's narrating the story. He brings up a lot of questions about, like, what makes a kid troubled, and he has ADHD, which is very well represented in the book. it's a very fresh take on this Greek mythology, which is really cool. You kind of look forward to seeing the different gods and the different mythical creatures and characters sort of in this new Americanized format while still being very recognizable as those characters themselves. However, I think that the reason why my experience maybe wasn't so wholeheartedly great was that Rick Riordan is writing a series about a set of myths that's very much centered around rape and sexual assault. Anyone who's read any Greek myths knows that that's sort of a central element of those particular myths. And so Rick Riordan does his best to write around those things in those stories because he is writing for a younger audience. However, as an adult, you can still kind of... there's just some very uncomfortable moments where you can tell he's writing around it. There's a line really early on in the novel where Percy Jackson talks about being in a foot race with some nymphs, but he can't outrun them because they've had so much practice running away from the lovesick gods. And a middle grader's not going to know what that means. Like, they're just going to read past that and think, oh, cool, like foot races with nymphs. But as an adult, you kind of get this, like, feeling in your stomach. There's also a story that is sort of retold that's definitely about sexual assault in the original myth. I won't get into it. That he reframes in a way that's a little bit problematic. So yeah, I think there was definitely some really great things. I really enjoyed the book, but definitely some weird moments as an adult. Reading something that was clearly there are large portions of it that are cut out for child readers or for middle grade readers.
Right. I also remember that there's a can't remember if it's this book or not, but there's like a habit to kind of Americanify the names of the characters, right?
Mr. D.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like Mr. D. I think Medusa shows up in one of them. And
she does show up in the first one, doesn't she?
That's actually the one I was talking about.
Yeah.
They kind of do something to the story of Medusa that I didn't appreciate. He's not interested in interrogating, some of these issues because they're not really appropriate for a middle grader to interrogate. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't, try to examine some of the problems with the Greek myths. I mean, a lot of the tension in the novel comes from Percy's sort of resistance to the callousness of the gods and sort of the way that they only care about their own problems. But yeah, I mean, and again, like, I don't think a middle grader would notice this at all. I mean, he does a pretty good job of knowing his audience. Just as an adult, if you're aware of these things, you're going to feel a little weird at times.
Now, are these Greek gods worse or better than the Greek gods of God of War, the video game?
I have never played the video game.
Oh, it is.
So.
Well, maybe you'll be talking about that later.
Maybe I should put
episode.
that on my list. No, actually, I think that one's been on my list. I don't think I've had access to it. But they're not. That is the one thing I did appreciate about this is that he doesn't try to sugarcoat it. He doesn't try to make them Americanized heroic, right? They're still very Greek. They're still very self-involved. They still just kind of like have fights. The whole premise of the book is that they're all fighting with each other over, somebody did something to someone else and that other person's feelings got hurt and they have children all the time. And, it is still very Greek, even though he's refreshed it in a very American way.
Cool. So, overall, recommend, don't recommend. We need to come up with like a cutesy way of saying we recommend or don't recommend.
We should put this monkey on someone else's back.
Pass the monkey.
Pass the monkey along. I would recommend this to anyone who likes reading about mythology. I would recommend it to anyone who wants to find something that they could read with their middle grader. I actually think this would be a really good book to share with your middle grader. So you're going to pass the
monkey to adult and children alike.
Yeah, like I would. And again, like I really don't think a middle grader is going to notice some of the things that he writes around. I think it's going to be definitely more of an adult thing. But it's good. I'm planning on reading the rest of them eventually. I'll let you all know how that goes.
All right. Well, Tessa, why don't you go ahead and pass it along?
Yeah, all right. Tell me about the monkey you had this week, Sam?
Me? Well, the monkey that I had for this week is the 2018 BBC miniseries A Very English Scandal.
I feel like there should always be a gasp after a very English scandal.
Well, it has to be a very restrained gasp because...
It can't be like the Southern lady gasp,
No,
though. It can't be
because
like,
this is
oh
English.
my.
Like, we can't talk about our feelings.
Yeah.
I'll try to find a royalty-free gasp to put in there.
All right. So, this is as I said, it's a BBC miniseries. It's a 3-episode thing, so it's a 3-hour investment. It's got some big names behind it. Stars Hugh Grant. So there you go. There's your big marquee name there.
Late career Hugh Grant?
A late career Hugh Grant.
I thought that Hugh Grant was done with acting, but he's been making a resurgence recently.
Yes, well, if you saw the recent film, as all three of us did, The Gentleman by Guy Ritchie, you know that all late career Hugh Grant projects are not created the same.
Wiser words were never spoken.
Yes, A Very English Scandal was, as I will say more about, good. The Gentleman was not. So, Hugh Grant, but also Ben Whishaw. And if you don't know the name Ben Whishaw, you probably know him as...
Paddington!
Hooray! Yes, he is Paddington Bear. You might also, if you're a James Bond fan, recognize him as Q from from Skyfall forward.
He's also Richard the Second in The Hollow Crown.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Obscure Ben Whishaw reference for the win.
He's a big-time British miniseries actor. He's also the lead in London Spy, which I haven't gotten to yet. The Hour was a 2-season series. Anyway, but also written by, Very English Scandal was written by Russell T Davies of early Doctor Who fame. He left Doctor Who amid a lot of criticism. People said, well, why don't you just let Stephen Moffat take over? He's a much better writer. That was a thing people said once upon a time. Let Stephen Moffat have this project. He would do better than the person who's currently doing it. We all said it. There's a time machine moment for you. But Russell T Davies is responsible for Eccleston and Tennant, who he is also responsible for all the good, bad, and ugly that is Torchwood. So he wrote A Very English Scandal. The director of A Very English Scandal, Stephen Frears, who you may or may not have heard of, but he is a big influence in my life because he directed the original film adaptation of High Fidelity. But he also directed Dirty Pretty Things, The Queen, Philomena, Florence Foster Jenkins. If there's a prestige British movie that gets nominated for an Oscar, it's a 50-50 shot he directed it.
So this is basically like the royalty of British miniseries.
Yes. And so they all got together to dramatize a true story about Jeremy Thorpe, a Liberal Party MP and eventually leader of the Liberal Party between the years 1965 and 79. Jeremy Thorpe begins a relationship with a man named Norman Joseph, and this relationship comes back to haunt him over the years. The show gets into issues of the intersection of homosexuality and British politics. It spans a time period. In 1965, homosexuality was still illegal in Britain. By the time we get to the end of that time span, it is legalized, although certainly still stigmatized. So we see how that impacts, scandal and, the potential downfall of an important British politician. We also see it becomes a law show for a while. It becomes a comical murder plot at some point. It's a really interesting story.
So why did you want to watch it? Like, why was it on your list?
Well, it was on my list because, as you mentioned, this is like British miniseries royalty here. One of the great things about watching British drama, the more you watch, the more you start to see faces and names over and over again, particularly on the BBC. there is a family of actors, and that's very comforting. Um, I began watching British dramas around 2003. The very first one I ever watched was a miniseries called Bodies. Basically, Britain was doing The Resident, or any other kind of hospital show where they take on serious themes and ideas way before we were. Um, it was created by a guy named Jed Mercurio, who also created 2018's Bodyguard, which you can find on Netflix, which is another great miniseries. Um, from there, I also started watching one of my other favorites is MI5, um, which starred Matthew McFadden, who you might know as Darcy from the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice, David Oyelowo, who played MLK in the movie Selma, and Keely Hawes, who is one of the stars of Bodyguard. Basically, you should watch Bodyguard. This is also a stealth recommendation for Bodyguard as well. So this is what got, I'm always on the lookout for the next big British thing that people are talking about that's got some of the names I recognize. And so A Very English Scandal was one of those. So really sight unseen, I added it to my list.
So why did it take you so long to watch it, since you're such a huge fan of the British drama?
Well, as we will talk about over the weeks to come, it's hard to check things off our list sometimes. And the way that I check off a lot of these mini-series is on plane flights when I travel. And so last year it was on my list. I ended up watching a couple of other things instead, and I thought, well, I'll just get to this one next year. And then we didn't travel anywhere this year because the pandemic happened. So I thought now is a really good time. This is a good way to start off the podcast with something that has been on my list, and I have been really wanting to get it off of the list.
All right. So what was your experience with this show?
So first of all, the writing is very good. After all, it's not Moffat, so it would be good writing. It was good. Ben Whishaw is amazing, as he is in everything. He really brings this character of Norman Joseph to life. Every time Norman Joseph says all he wants is his national insurance card, you sit there and you go, just give the man his national insurance card. Like, why make this man's life difficult? Incidentally, the real Norman Joseph is still alive, and he has a real take on this miniseries, which I won't share because I don't want to spoil it. But you'll learn something if you watch this. It's a good historical document. It is based on a true story, and it is a limited time investment. It's 3 hours. It's on Netflix. It's on Amazon Prime. Excuse me. Ready to go. Ready to be consumed. I certainly recommend it.
So you would put this monkey on someone else's
I would pass
back.
the monkey.
Okay. Pass the monkey.
All right. And speaking of passing, I'm going to pass it over to Andy, who's going to tell us about... Well, you're going to tell us about some highs and lows, right?
Yes, some highs and lows. Some very, very good highs and some still very good lows. I watched Akira Kurosawa's movie High and Low.
I am not familiar with that one. Tell us about it.
All right. So, High and Low is a movie that takes place in, I would say, early 1960s Japan. It's clearly very contemporary. A movie came out in, I think, 1963, so probably 1960 Japan. It is about a man who is running a shoe factory, and he has an opportunity. I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this here. He takes a gamble. He chases a gambler's high of mortgaging everything he owns to get enough money to be able to buy a controlling share in the company.
And this is going to go very well. Everyone's going to be happy.
Right.
End of movie.
End of movie. Yes.
Right. So he has his 50 million yen. He's about to do that. If he fails to take over the company, he will be kicked out of a controlling share of the company, or he will just be kicked out of the company. So very high stakes for him. He has been working at this factory for 30 years. He knows shoes. He wants to make good, high quality shoes. So he gets the money. He arranges the deal. And right before he can send his, send his underling with the money to go make the purchase, gets a phone call. And the phone call lets him know that his son has been kidnapped. There is a ransom, a ransom for his son. And this man, his name's Gondo. He immediately says, "Okay, I will pay. I will end up risking my entire future, even more. Taking a bigger gamble, trying to figure out where I can get this money even further. This is going to bankrupt me, but I'm going to pay the ransom to get my son." And after he is done saying that to himself and to his wife and to his partner, his son walks in the door. And as it turns out,
gasp.
Yeah, we have another gasp.
Yeah. And as it turns out, his son was not kidnapped, but his chauffeur's son, who is best friends with his son, was. And this movie then becomes a tense exploration about that premise. He was about to pay to have his own, to save his own son, but now it's not his son. He immediately calls the police, and it's about the investigation of how to get this boy back and what happened and who kidnapped him and why. And it is a very, very well structured procedural movie.
It's a really interesting question. By the way, I am by no means a financial advisor, but essentially, is your child worth $500,000? I guess that's an interesting question. Now, have you much experience with Kurosawa films before this one?
I mean, I watched Seven Samurai back when I was like 13. I don't really consider that having watched it because it's been almost 17 years.
Okay.
Kind of a thing. So yeah, I
So
would say that this is my first.
Yeah, so you would say this would be your first then.
Right. This is my first Kurosawa movie.
Okay. Why pick this one?
Okay. This movie, it was pitched at, it was explained to me in the top 10 crime movies YouTube video I watched. It was pitched to me as a kind of like a single setting movie, right? It's a movie that takes place all within this room where it's all about this choice of this man, whether or not to basically pay for his chauffeur's son's life. Working with the police, making this choice. Gondo-san is in a very, very tough spot. Really, really tough. And I'm a big fan of any movie that is unique about its setting, right? That has some kind of weird gimmick about its setting. I love single room movies. I love single take movies. Basically single anything movies, I'm probably sold.
So it sounds like to me like it's a combination, and this would be a really weird movie. It sounds like a combination of the Alfred Hitchcock movie Rope and the Mel Gibson Gary Sinise vehicle Ransom, which would be a very odd movie.
Yeah. As it turns out, that is how it was pitched to me.
Okay.
It actually is not that. It only spends a certain amount of time. Since we're not going past the first third, it only spends about the first third of the movie. The movie is 2.5 hours long, by the way, but it does not feel 2.5 hours long. You are, what's the phrase? You pay for the whole seat, but you're only using the edge. This is a tense movie, but it is very much mostly a police procedural. It is a movie about a police force as a whole going about its police force job.
And that's unusual for Kurosawa, right? I mean, I've only seen a few of his films, but generally they tend to be more samurai oriented, right?
Right,
So
right.
this would be
And
kind of a departure for him.
yeah, and Kurosawa has his favorite leading man, Mifune, as Gondo-san, and the similarities between a samurai from the 17th, 18th century and Gondo are very apparent. He is a man very much driven by honor. He definitely positions himself, and he just can't help but be intimidating. But more importantly, this is a one of the first times where I watched a movie and been like, oh, this is how actual police work would be done. This is it does a lot of really interesting things, like the first phone call that the police are in on, that the police have recorded with the kidnapper. It doesn't actually show you the phone call as it's happening. It shows it to you as the police are re-listening to it, right? So there's this moment where they've had a little bit of time to process it. It doesn't feel very like a Sherlock Holmesy or Poirot or any of those things where like the epiphanies happen immediately. You can see the entire police force working on this and listening to it. And also, really quick, it is a movie where I would not say that you know the police force or the kidnapper make a specific mistake, right? These are both high level chess players playing at the height of their game.
Sounds like you want to pass this monkey as well.
Absolutely. High and Low is great. There's tons of social commentary. Obviously the main character is a millionaire. Uh, it's a big deal. The high and low actually refers to how high he is in society and how low the kidnapper is. Definitely watch this. It is tense. Yeah. Just do yourself a favor. Watch it. This monkey gets passed on to you, dear listeners. So have fun with that. Tune in next week. I'll be going over the video game Event Zero. Sam?
I'll be taking a look at the deluxe re-release of the seminal debut album by Smashing Pumpkins, Gish.
Tessa?
And I will be watching, for the very first time, Judgment Free Zone, Jaws.
Sam? Dr. Sam, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Sam_Morris9, and you can find me on Letterboxd as Archie Leach 9.
Tessa, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Swehla, SWEHLA, Tessa. And you can also find me on Letterboxd under the same name.
All right. You can find me on Twitter at Hebrews Pale Ale and Letterboxd as well. You can find us on Twitter at Monkey Backlog. You can email us at monkeyoffmybacklog@gmail.com. Our theme song, Hot Shot by Scott Holmes, can be found at scottholmesmusic.com. Please rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's all we have today. Get that monkey off your back. We're going to have to figure out an actual catchphrase.
Yep.
I like that one a little bit. Yeah.